keep finding ways that we're helping partners finding either, balance in their life or focus or purpose.
Practices that are going to help improve your project management skills or your finances.
We're here to talk about setting long-term goals and then how to achieve them.
Increasing your quality, therefore becoming the best place in town to work.
Welcome to Academy Live.
Welcome to Academy Live. We are excited to have David Powell, VP of Sales Strategy here at Pax8 on the show today. David Powell is a 20-plus year veteran in the IT industry, and the last 20 were spent in managed services. He was named one of the top 250 people in managed services by MSP Mentor for over 5 years. Powell has worked for 3 of the top 100 companies that rank in MSP Mentor 501 each year, which is extremely impressive. He started at Pax8 all the way back in April. At Pax8, we like to say that 2 months can feel like 1 year because things are always changing and rolling. So we're just so happy to have him on our team. We're looking forward to having a conversation with David today. We'll be talking all about his career journey, what he's learned along the way, and he'll be sharing some important tips for MSPs when it comes to security and leadership. Can't wait to have him on.
But first, I want to take a moment and share some good news and some props for Bessie. I'd like to talk about elevation.
Thank you.
Wow.
Oh my goodness.
Picked up the manager title. Check that out.
Program manager.
And you mentioned,
Hooray.
Bessie, you mentioned 2 months can sound like a lot. We have Pax8 years. We kind of compare to dog years. How does it feel? And congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I just feel this exciting. I'm really excited to have this elevation and to have my title reflect a little bit more of what I do with Academy and at Pax8. So I'm really excited. So thank you, Rex and Chris, for all of your support over the last year. It's been amazing.
Oh, we don't just give those away. They're earned.
Appreciate that.
So I don't think we really want to waste any time getting to David Powell. He always has plenty to say, so we want to make sure he has maximum time on the show today. I'd like to bring him on. Welcome, David Powell, to Academy Live. Thank you for coming on. We always like to start these with a little bit of a humble brag. So why don't you go ahead and kind of tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so my background has been interesting. I have a son who is finished school, and my daughter's in college, and so you start to hear from like a lot of their peers, and they're kind of like, "Hey, Mr. Powell, like, what did you do to, be where you are?" And I love to tell them I have no idea whatsoever. Is that I was a speech communication major, have a master's degree in public relations and advertising. Never took a business class, never took a tech class, but my entire career has been in, technology. And so ultimately, I like to tell people that I'm a translator, as I speak nerd and I speak businessman, and can translate, between the two. But by and large, I've been in the MSP space and cybersecurity space, and I just love this whole like community. There's just great people in it. People I've known a long time. People I've really enjoyed watching succeed and grow and move on to other things, and it's just been truly rewarding to be a part of this overall, channel MSP space. And now I think cybersecurity, now that I've kind of leaned into that, is an area that I think scares people, and maybe MSPs don't know that they have what it takes to succeed in that. And so I really want to help out and show them that they do have what it takes to succeed, and they can rise to meet that challenge just like they've met all the other tech challenges that have been thrown their way. So watch Pax8 grow up from the start, and I'm real excited about the opportunity to join the team. Like they said, started back in April.
Talking about growing from the start, I mean, 20 years, that's kind of like back in the days when we had to explain to people what managed services was so we can see if they wanted to buy it, right?
Yeah. I think I got my start, Rex. I don't know if you remember, or Chris might. I know Bessie won't, but got my start. We were selling Frame Relay to replace point-to-point circuits. So my very first job, we were selling FRADs, which was frame relay access device. And so you had
Access
these
devices.
point-to-point
Yep.
circuits, and you put the frame relay in, which is kind of like the early, it kind of looks like MPLS or something like that now, but that was like the early stage, and that's where we got our start. And then we started selling internet access to people that didn't have internet access, so they could get to their MySpace page and do a Lycos search. So those were the days back when I got to start in this industry.
Yeah, I did kind of the same path, right? Like we wanted to monitor Novell networks. And in order to do that, we had to route IPX. So we started selling frame relay access to the internet and routing IPX so I could monitor the Novell networks and route IP so we can get them on the internet. And man, that's when I first really started learning about how dangerous the internet was with security and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. What's funny is like some of the immutable principles that are still in play today. My very first like big sale, we sold frame relay to this large bank up in North Alabama. And it was all this Cisco equipment, and the core router was like $250,000, which at the time was just ridiculous expensive. And so the client calls one day and they're like, "Hey, Dave, our sites are down." And just casually as a joke, I said, "Hey, have you thought about turning it off and turning it back on again?" And I did not mean that, because you should not hard reboot expensive Cisco gear. And he's like, "Well, hang on, let me go try it," and puts the phone down. And I thought, I'm doomed. I'm going to lose my job. I've totally screwed up their whole environment. And I was actually going to, go get somebody from support. And then he picks the phone back up and goes, "Hey man, that worked. Thanks so much." And I'm like, oh, some of those things like turn it off, turn it back on again, that worked, 20 plus years ago. And that's still, is good advice today when tech's not going your way.
So you just
David,
mentioned
you're
Alabama. And at the
yeah.
beginning of the show, we were talking about peace and luck, right? Like in the intro, they were talking about peace and luck and how you say it in all these different languages. Is there a different way to say it down in Alabama? I'm not sure.
Yeah, man, it's peace and luck, y'all. So that's all you gotta say. Peace and luck, y'all. It's all good. And if you're trying to say to a big group, I think you could say you all. Although really y'all, I just kind of use y'all as collective, y'all as individual, y'all is a catch-all for anyone not yourself, basically.
David,
Got it.
what's one thing you love about where you're from? What's one thing you love about Birmingham or Alabama?
It really is the community. So I've grown up here. I still see people regularly that I went to like elementary school with. So, and my kids are playing with their kids, and that's just like there's something tremendous about that. My wife went through some sickness starting back in September, and had chemotherapy and stuff, and things are good. But when some friends of ours sent out a meal sign up list for people to bring us dinner 3 times a week. And from September to February, people brought us dinner 3 times a week, and no one brought it twice. So just that
Wow.
sense of community, people people you've been around a long time, and the depth of those relationships, you can't put a price tag on those types of, committed friendships that you've really had really your entire life.
That's really impressive. So David picked out today's quote, and I understand it's your favorite high school quote. You mind sharing a little bit about that and what's the significance is for you?
Yeah, so actually that's me and my wife from high school at prom right there. I was her
Oh,
first date in high school. We dated in high school as a junior. She was a sophomore, dated all through college, and then up to now. So I think that the quote that, is a Ralph Waldo Emerson quote. And the quote is, "It's as easy in the world to live after the world's opinions. It is easy in solitude to live after our own. But the great man is he who in the midst of the crowd keeps with perfect sweetness the independence of solitude." So that's Ralph Waldo Emerson's quote. But the way that I would paraphrase that is it's super easy to be yourself by yourself. It's easy to go along with the crowd, but the great man is the one that can be himself in the middle of the crowd. And I think that that's, good advice in general is, I think there's a certain amount of conformity that's necessary, just to kind of get along in the world. And then I think the loner is hard to build community sometimes if you're just kind of that, off by yourself. But I think the person that can maintain the things that make them unique and distinct, but still, get along and kind of stay in the mix with everyone instead of just going and, living in a van down by the river like Matt Foley from Saturday Night Live fame. If you can kind of be in the midst with everybody, I think that's That's a really powerful thing. So can you retain who you are, but the individuality you have there, but also do it in community? So that quote's really stuck with me the whole time, and it really has been one of those that I kind of point to and try to live out.
I really,
Yeah,
as
David,
as a
I've heard
philosophy
people talk
minor, I really
about
enjoy
you.
that.
Yeah, and David,
As a
I've heard people
philosophy
talk about you,
minor.
and the word genuine comes up a lot, right? Like, and I think that is how you've connected to this quote that you've picked.
Yeah, and I
And
think
I think just,
Rex,
yeah,
I was talking to somebody earlier today, kind of doing like a mentoring call with a Pax8 coworker, and I was talking about that idea of like for a young leader, vulnerability is something that comes unnaturally. Is that lots of times vulnerability is perceived as weakness, but how do you hold in tension kind of that vulnerability that makes somebody real and allows you to kind of see who they actually are? But how do you hold that in tension with confidence and competence around your job? And I think that particularly for young leaders, it's a little easier to kind of put up that fake, I've got this thing licked and I've got all the answers. It's a little harder to be vulnerable, but I do think that vulnerability yields that genuineness that people really can relate to and understand. So yeah, I try to, I want to know people and I want to be known. And that's a two-way street there.
Yeah, I think as a leader, you have to be vulnerable so people are willing to be vulnerable with you, so that you can get to the real issues and work on the right stuff.
Yep.
and I think too what you
But
were
it's
saying
hard to say
before,
I don't
David,
know.
about yeah, about being true to yourself. That's much more easily. You're talking about this connector role you have between someone in business and someone in tech, and how do you connect those people together? I would say like following this philosophy is going to make it much easier to be that translator and that connector between people as well. So that really stood out to me as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And, again, I think as a parent, when I'm talking to my kids, I'm like, you got to be who you are, but there also is this certain amount of assimilation that needs to happen. When you're early in your career and you come into the workplace, if I work for Rex, I might look like, okay, what is Rex wearing? What time does Rex show up to the office? How does Rex go about his day? And you begin to emulate kind of some of those people who have been around and are, achieving in the workplace. So there's a certain amount that you want to assimilate, but you don't want to do it at the expense of kind of who you are.
It's interesting. Right after the acquisition of Sea Level by Pax8, somebody said to me, "I'm really worried about you, Rex. You've been with small companies. You're going to be swimming with sharks, and you don't even know it, right?" And I said, "Well, I'm not really worried about finding any sharks. I'm just going to go be me, and if I encounter a shark, I'm just going to call it out." I'm pretty happy to say, what is it, 2 years and 2 months later, I haven't run into the shark yet, but which I think says a lot about Pax8 in general. But I face no fear stepping into being an exec at the big company, because I just have confidence to go be me, and I wasn't worried about it. I think that's a lot
Yeah.
what this quote is about.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think too, people worry about the wrong things. I mean, I live in Alabama. The coast is, just a couple hours from here. And people are always worried about getting in the ocean because there's sharks. But, the data says that hippos kill more people every year than sharks do, but no one's scared of hippos. So I think, people get these like kind of misplaced fears of certain things, and something seems, oh, working in a big company, that seems scary. But really, the group of people you work with is a pretty small community inside a big company, and that's where you just want to make sure that you're genuine and real with the small group that you typically interact with.
Right on. So, David, tell us a little bit about some of the experiences you had in the industry before you came to Pax8.
It's been really a weird ride, right? And I mean weird in a good way. But it's been a strange run. So I started out in the MSP space, and I took a job in the MSP space, and it was before, like you mentioned earlier, before people even called it MSP. We were just doing recurring revenue stuff, and then they're like, "Oh, well, you're an MSP." I'm like, "What's an MSP?" And they're like, "Oh, it's a managed service provider." I'm like, "Oh, I guess we are an MSP then." And so I was there, and then I got recruited to another MSP, and the CEO recruited me to that company. And 4 months later, he was removed for reasons that don't need to be discussed here. But I was like, "Oh, that's not good." And so all of a sudden, it was like, "Well, what am I going to do?" And so I went to this big company called TechLinks, and TechLinks was basically a VAR back in the day, selling EMC, Cisco, VMware, Microsoft, and Citrix. and they wanted to build this recurring revenue practice and had tried to buy the MSP had worked at previously, and they couldn't come together on numbers. So I called them up and said, hey, I just went to this other place, didn't work out like I wanted. Can I come build a managed services practice there? And they said, sure, come on over. So when I got there, we were doing about 300,000 a month in recurring. And when I left, we were at 3.4 million a month in recurring. So we had this huge growth in 7 years. Most of that was organic. 1.2 of it was acquired because we went back and bought the 2 employers that I worked for previously. We acquired them. Then I left there, went to Logic Monitor, where I ran the MSP business unit over there. And then we grew that and sold it to Vista Equity Partners. Then a PE firm wanted to buy some MSPs and roll them together. So I advised them on the investment thesis and investment criteria. So we bought one, and then they dropped me in a CRO. Then we bought 3 more. Then I left there and went to Perch, which was cybersecurity software. And then Perch got acquired
CRO
by ConnectWise.
meaning chief revenue
Chief
officer.
revenue.
So you had a sales. You were running sales at that point.
Yeah, sales, marketing, and client success. And, Rex, our investment thesis there, and you'll appreciate this given your process orientation, as our investment thesis was, let's buy MSPs that have strong operations and lack good go-to-market. So the idea was being that if I had a recipe of chocolate chip cookies and Bessie had a recipe for chocolate chip cookies, it's easier to merge those recipes together if there's a recipe, as opposed to Bessie and I both go in the kitchen and come out with chocolate chip cookies and there's no repeatable process. So we bought companies that are operationally mature that we could merge, and then I brought the go-to-market strategy on top of that. So that was our investment thesis for the acquisitions there.
Just to throw a thought out there real quick.
Yeah.
Within the Academy, we've coached a lot of companies to help them increase their valuation. And I was talking to some of the PE-backed buyers, and I asked them, I said, how do you feel about us working with these companies, which makes it to where you have to pay more for them? And every single one of them said, we love it. We would rather pay more for a better run company. So,
correct.
Let's make sure our audience hears that loud and clear. Any minute you spend working on your company is a minute well spent.
Yes. PE firms want certainty, right? So the more certainty they have, they're willing to pay more. So when you kind of think about it, would you rather buy a house, these crazy housing markets, you hear about people who bought houses without ever seeing it, well, would you rather do that, or would you rather have a thorough home inspection? You've been able to look at everything. If you've been able to have a thorough home inspection and look at everything, then you're like, oh, I feel comfortable about this offer I'm making, versus sight unseen, who knows if that basement floods when there's rain or, whatever that problem may be. So I think that we were looking for better certainty, and then we wanted to create that certainty for our private equity firm. It's like, yeah, that's good. We know what we're getting if we acquire there. So I totally agree with you, Rex. I think that even though they may pay more, they're paying for certainty, which is, ultimately helps them have the kind of outcomes that they're looking for. But after Perch got bought by ConnectWise, I served a little bit of time at ConnectWise, where I helped start the partner program for cybersecurity over there. And then I sat out my non-compete as president of a software company out in LA that does employee productivity insights. Now, let me tell you real quick, super interesting on that is we could tell, we would tie into the API of all the business applications and could see who's working and who's not. And a couple of things that we found that were super interesting that just might be of interest to you guys. One is, if you're really, really good at the office, you're good anywhere. It really doesn't matter where you're working. But if you suck at the office, you really suck remote. So it's one of those things that the data showed pretty clearly, that if Rex was at the office and he was kind of goofing off and was worried that, I might walk by and see that he was goofing off, he worked a little better. But at home, he just did whatever. So basically, good people are good people wherever. Not great employees are really not great, remotely. And then the other data point we saw across thousands of users is that 10% of any company only works an hour and 38 minutes a day. That's it. 1 hour and 38 minutes. So by the time that Chris is going to get his second cup of coffee, 10% of most companies is done for the day, which is
it 25% utilization?
Oh yeah, it's ridiculous. And we had the data to prove it. It was just crazy. So after that, I came back to cybersecurity. Oh, it's crazy. And after that, I came back to cybersecurity space at a startup, which was great. But then, Pax8 came and said, hey, Dave, we really could use some help with these 2 things. And, made me kind of the offer without a horse head in the bed, like Corleone, but maybe an offer I couldn't refuse. And so here I am at Pax8, and it's been a good 2 months.
Right on. Quite a storied career. If you're new in the space and tuning in, if you look at anybody with a little gray in their beard, if you ask them to look back on their careers, it looked nothing like they planned it to be. Right? It's definitely not a straight line. So,
Yeah.
um, just
And, Rex, what's funny is here locally, I was on the board of education and I was speaking at graduation because I was board president one year. And so I made that comment. I said, the road is windy. So I'm like, hey, students, if you don't pick the right college, change it. If you don't like your major, change it. And that the road is windy. And I said, at the time I'd had 10 jobs since college, and my phone in my pocket just starts buzzing like crazy. And a bunch of my friends were saying, great message. And the other half were like, thanks, Dave. Now all the old people think our board education president can't hold down a job. So it is one of those things to where, depending on the generation, some people, did go work the same place 40 years, get the gold watch and retire. And I don't know that that's the way it is now. It is much more windy. You probably never thought that you'd be sitting here at Pax8 after selling sea level. And, here you are. So the road is windy indeed.
That's my
there's
background
no
is in
way I thought that
education,
was
and
going to
that's
happen.
something I always preached when I worked at colleges and universities was, make sure you're passionate about what you're doing, what you're studying, where you're working, because that passion will drive you, and don't be worried to change because
Yeah.
things
Could not
change all
agree
the
more.
time. Yeah, definitely.
So,
And tell us a little bit,
I,
David, about what you do at Pax8 now. What your role is VP of Sales Strategy, but what does that mean?
Yeah, that's. I think it's kind of a placeholder title, to be honest. But basically, what it is there's two areas I've been asked to focus on. One is the cybersecurity go-to-market for our MSPs. So we're going to build a program where we're going to teach, and we're going to partner with Rex and the Academy team and you guys, teach MSPs how to sell cybersecurity. Basically, it is a risk conversation, not a technology conversation. It should not be vendor heavy because ultimately end users don't care about vendors. End users care about, do I get to keep my job or can I avoid a breach? And if we get breached, then I have to go put that little, open to work thing on my LinkedIn because I got fired because I was the one that allowed the breach to come in or whatever. So we want to teach them how to sell cybersecurity, number one. And then number two, as you guys know, private equity money is flowing into the MSP space, and it's really kind of hollowing out the middle. Used to have like a nice kind of bell-shaped standard distribution of MSPs around size. And now what you're getting is the PE firms are buying the middle guys, combining them together, and you're getting a little more of a barbell-shaped average to where you've got a lot of big MSPs that are PE backed and then some smaller MSPs. So how do we build programs or whatever that makes sense to those big private equity backed MSPs that have a little bit different, challenges or motives than maybe the smaller guys? So those are the two things that I'm going to be focused on.
Yeah, that put a spin right with Academy. We say meet every partner where they are, which is their maturity level, and the PE world is kind of changing that up on us a little bit. So we're trying to make sure we're delivering the right message at the right time there, for sure. That's been hard, but I think it's good
David,
for the industry.
I kind of want to ask David, if you don't mind, I'd like to hear, since you've been on coming in April, what are some things that you've discovered as like new opportunities that you didn't know about when you joined? What are some of the things that you're seeing that are exciting you about your role and the opportunity here?
Yeah, so I didn't know much about Academy, and I mean, before I got here, because I wasn't a Pax8, customer before, coming from the software space. But, the Academy is awesome, is that ultimately MSPs struggle a little bit with what do we do next to get better? And so I think giving them that journey around, like Rex said, meet them where they are and help them go forward. So I was a little concerned, like, okay, I'm going to have to go create all this content, but then what's my delivery mechanism for this content? Where is it going to live, and how are we going to drive people to it, and how is this content going to have a life beyond me delivering it over and over and over and over? And so I was super encouraged by Academy. I've been super encouraged with what we were already doing around the CIS framework with our partners, is helping them improve what they do, because one of the elements of my program is that you can't sell what you don't do, right? So you can't be the out of shape personal trainer. And so we need to go make sure that our partners are fit around cybersecurity. And then I can help them go become a personal trainer to their customers around cybersecurity. So I would say that those are the two most pleasant surprises. Plus, I mean, be honest, what I'm really pleased with is the autonomy, the idea of like, hey, here's this thing, go do it, and I'm going to do it. And there's not a lot of like, what about this? Or I keep bumping into like, guardrails. It's a lot of autonomy around go do it. And it's, Dan Pink and Drive talks about what do people want? Autonomy, mastery, purpose. So the autonomy piece around that is been really encouraging.
When he said Daniel Pink, he's talking about the book Drive, which talks about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And when you give a professional those three things, they do amazing things.
Yep.
So that's definitely clear around Pax8. So I think it's great that you've been given that autonomy. I was a little nervous at first that you were going to go create another delivery mechanism for partners and create some confusion. But we talked and came to a conclusion pretty quick that you're going to leverage Academy to
Oh
get
yeah.
the message out there. So
Yep.
I
I'm
definitely
just one
appreciated
dude.
that.
Just one guy. And that's really where we have to like right now with the program, we're really kind of selling my credibility, but we very quickly have to pivot to the program having credibility, right? Is that I don't scale. I'm just one guy. So we have to like build the program, show what the program can deliver from a result standpoint, and then begin to sell that instead of selling David Powell's done this and he can show you how. So
And
Yeah,
what do you
that's the
imagine
crazy
that
thing about.
program? Oh, sorry. Just asking, what do you imagine that program looking like, David?
yeah, so we're going through the process right now. We're like in the beta stage. So we
Okay.
identified partners that were already fit, if you will, back to that idea. You need to be physically fit before you can be personal trainer. So we've identified the ones that are fit. We've talked to them about what the program is going to entail around sales enablement, teaching their sales team how to sell risk instead of technology. And then ultimately we want to build out some marketing as a service thing so that we can take the stuff that Pax8 does really well, which is marketing and sales, and then package that and democratize it and take it across our partner base. So right now, we've pitched it to the beta partners. They're all very much enthused about it. In fact, I'll be honest, I was a little surprised at Beyond. I got to talk to some of our largest partners, and I thought that some of them might be like, oh, Dave, that's a cute little program you're building, but we've got that all figured out. Instead, the large partners like, when can you be on a plane and come train my team? Right. So we're moving very, very quickly with that to build out basically the repeatable sales process of how to go sell cybersecurity to your client base first. And we'll have that ready to roll out to partners. We're beginning to schedule stuff into August to go on site and do that.
Talk about purpose and meaning. It's great that there's a place for it to land. And I was watching Rex as you said that, some of the assumptions we make about the industry and partners and readiness. And you said, that there's a lot of demand and need. I saw kind of a validating head nod, with Rex about there's so much meaning and purpose and value in a lot of these initiatives and things going on. So I just wanted to comment how excited I am
Yeah.
about that and to see that and validate it. And
Yeah.
Rex,
And
I
I
don't know if
think,
you want to
Chris,
add to that.
I think from the altruistic idea of like, we really want to help our MSPs be better. And, that's what Academy is built around is like, how do we help them become better MSPs? And I think, with the sales conversation, if we can help them with that, most MSPs are scared to go have that very first conversation because end clients don't understand cybersecurity. So, Chris, if you were my customer and I was an MSP and I come in and say, hey, Chris, I'm here to talk to you about cybersecurity. In your head, you're like, cybersecurity equals technology. Technology equals what I'm paying you to do. So all of a sudden you're like,
Yeah, I
whoa,
already
whoa,
pay you
whoa.
for that.
Yeah, aren't you doing this for me already? And
This
so
conversation.
they're immediately on the defensive. So you really have to teach them how to start the conversation differently around risk. It's not a tech thing, and educate them. So it really is this education driven sale as opposed to, hey, I have a whole bunch of products. Which one do you want to buy? So that's what really the crux of what we want to teach.
About a year ago or so, Scott Chasen worked really hard on he's our CTO, defining out what Pax8's vision is. And I remember he was doing the vision tour, coming around all the departments within Pax8, and he had a slide deck. And I think slide number 4 said that Pax8's ability to grow is highly dependent on our partners' ability to sell. And then, the very next slide said, our partners rank, selling as their most challenging aspect of their business, right? Like, and so that really kind of, amplified for me, that we need to really tackle, the whole partner enablement side of helping them with that selling motion. Command of the message, as we did it internally at Pax8, I think inspired me quite a bit to take the command of the message methodology out to the partners. So we started working internally a lot on how do we help our partners understand question-based selling methodologies, and then this is kind of to be announced a little bit, but we're going to be bringing a whole set of value drivers around the grow revenue, gain efficiencies, reduce risk, from that perspective about how our partners should be talking to and leading their prospects and their clients to their solutions, and then layer on the cybersecurity, using question-based selling to talk about security. Can you maybe comment a little bit on how you want to bring that to the partner community?
Yeah, I think that it is this conversation that's, well, first, I always want to have a lot of empathy for the MSPs. Is first is that this seems unnatural to them, right? But they've done this in the past. Like all the stuff we talked about earlier with frame relay and all those new challenges, right? I mean, at one point everything was on prem, and then you've got hybrid, and then you got stuff in the cloud, and then you've got mobile devices, you got remote workers, and so MSPs have risen to the challenge on behalf of their end users over and over and over again. This is the next thing, but it seems unnatural because a lot of these guys are technologists. And really, this is about risk. So, how do we have these risk conversations? And are they talking to the right people about the right things? And so, I think that from a sales standpoint, it's really just this kind of reorientation around who do I talk to about what, right? Instead of talking to the technical contact at the law firm, I need to talk to the COO because the COO is paid to calculate risk and decide risk for the company versus maybe the technical contact. So it's just a reframing and a reorienting towards different conversations, but they are totally capable of doing it. And I have a lot of faith that if we kind of show them the path forward, that they will, be very successful doing that. And we've seen that play out in other places I've been.
Cool. And David, I want to switch gears here. And I want to ask, so one of the things that I really appreciate about the time I've had with you is what a great storyteller you are. And I kind of want to lean into that a little bit and kind of find,
Yeah.
how has that shaped your career, and how has that skill ability kind of developed and influenced you?
Yeah. So I think I was always decent at that naturally. But what really influenced me on that was a book by Donald Miller called Story Brand. And in that book, he kind of lays out this idea, Chris, where the top three highest grossing movie franchises of all times have the exact same plot. That's Star Wars, Harry Potter, and Lord of the Rings, right? And it's all aligned to this guy, this philosopher named Joseph Campbell. And Joseph Campbell has this thing called the hero's journey, right? And so what happens in all those? There is a normal person who has something special about them, but they don't know it until they meet a guide. Then the guide helps them unlock their heroic ability. They go on this heroic quest. Usually the guide dies. And then they go and do the quest, and then they come back, with their newfound skills. So I think the problem lots of times is that from the vendor community is that
David,
we want to be the hero.
There's a part of that story that I think is really important.
Yeah.
Who's the hero of the story?
That's where, yeah, exactly. Is that I think vendors want to ride in and be the hero. We're the hero. We are Gandalf, Dumbledore, or, whoever, or Obi-Wan, versus the idea that, we want to be the guide, sorry, not the hero. So the hero is Harry Potter, Frodo, or Luke Skywalker. And so we tend to want to come in and be the hero instead of the guide, where we have to come in and show them, hey, here's a wand, here's a lightsaber, here's a ring, and then show them a thing that they can go accomplish themselves. So it's just this idea of like, who is the hero and who is the guide? We want to be the guide, our partners to be the hero. Then for our partners, the MSPs, they need to be the guide and let their end user client be the hero. So in this role, we're Obi-Wan and they're Luke Skywalker, but to their clients, they're Obi-Wan and their client is Luke Skywalker. So I think that stories in general allow people to like retell and remember. So ultimately, I do think that that's something culturally we've gotten away from, is like the family sitting around the dinner table, kind of telling the family stories. So some of those stories get lost because you can't retell them and tell them downstream. But I do think there's a lot of power in that. That's the way that you kind of pass along what are our family values, or what are these things that we find to be important, and that kind of stuff. So I think that in general, a story, if I told you a story right now, you would kind of remember it and then you could retell it, later. Where if I just made a point to you, it may just go into the ether as soon as this meeting is over. So I feel like to give content life, give it some legs that live beyond the telling of the content, is to put it in a story format that people can retell and remember. So yeah, that's why I think that storytelling is important. It allows people to connect, and it allows people to relate, and then it allows them to remember and retell.
And I mean, is that a conscious thing you've developed that, or just something you're kind of interested in? I mean, where do you see this play out and with your
Oh no,
team?
it's a conscious thing. Is you know, my brain's kind of wired that way. So when I was coming up with this idea for the partner program, I created a parable to tell how this would be. And so I just started this whole thing around explaining the partner program and say, okay, there was a shipping container that arrived in Los Angeles. It was destined for Middle America, to the agricultural center of the country. The containers filled with agricultural products. It gets put on a train, sent to Middle America, and then delivered to a farm, right? 10 days later, the farmer looks across his field, which is supposed to be a bountiful crop, and it's all dead. And what we didn't know is that on that shipping container was the dreaded Southeast Asia fire ant, right? Has an insatiable desire for row crops, is genetically immune to typical pesticides and all this kind of stuff. So to the north, there's this agricultural commissioner, Michael Sam Phillips, we'll call him MSP. And MSP heard about this ant and the problems that it was creating. So Michael Sam Phillips goes out and he addresses his own farm first, right? So he looks at his own farm and does some things to protect his own farm. Then he goes and talks to 3 different farmers that he works with. One farmer says, I've heard about the ant, but that's far away. It's not going to come near me. I don't worry about it. The second farm he goes to, the guy's like, I don't have the money to spend to address this ant problem this year. Then he goes to a third, and it's this big corporate farm, and they said, great to see you, Michael Sam Phillips, MSP, because we just got this list of things we're supposed to do to address the ants. That ultimately is the plight of the MSP, right? Is they have to, there's this threat. This threat seems really very bad. It can lay waste to their entire business, and they have to address their own environment first, fix their own farm. And then when they go talk to their own clients about cybersecurity, you tend to get one of 3 answers. One is like, that's a far away thing. The bad guys won't Target and Bank of America. They don't care about me, or we can't afford to do anything about it. Or they're a compliance client and they have this list that they must adhere to. So that little parable was a way to like help people understand what the program, is going to do. And it seems to have connected and drawn people in and illustrate what it is that we're trying to accomplish. But yeah, my brain definitely kind of tries to think, how do you tell a story that people can relate to, that gives context to what you're trying to accomplish?
So Michael Sam Phillips is the guide and hero is the farmer.
Correct.
Did I get
Absolutely
that right?
correct. But he has to be his own little hero first, right? Because he's got his own farm. So you can't, I guess you can't give Luke Skywalker the wand if you don't know how to use the wand yourself. So with Obi-Wan, but yes, exactly.
Bessie, do this sound familiar from your background, education? Does this kind of relate?
Yeah. Oh yeah, connecting, even back when you were in grade school or something, and we had to annotate on, you're always, and you're reading a story, it was connect the text to yourself, connect the text to another text, connect the text. How can you connect? And that story really helps MSPs see themselves in it, and also think of other connections. Like as you're telling the story of this ant, I was thinking about this story I heard on the radio about rats, and how this one province in Canada has eliminated rats completely, but there's a groundhog problem. They have no rats, they have
Yeah.
groundhog problem all over the place. And thinking, I was like, that really connects with this too, of like, we can't only be focusing on the fire ant, because there's going to be another pest
That's right.
that comes, and cybersecurity is always changing. We're going to see more of these come up. So I think that story does a lot of different things that really help the MSP connect to themselves, connect to other people, connect to their business, and get some creative and thinking and that
Yeah.
retelling. Um,
Well, and that's
I,
where the law of unintended consequences that you were talking about, Bessie. There's this really famous story that you guys have probably heard called it's the Cobra problem, and it's the story of perverse
Imagine that he's got a
incentives.
story.
Yeah.
right.
So
Right?
in colonial India, there was this city that had a problem with cobras, and so the city leaders created a bounty where if the villagers would bring a dead cobra to them, they would pay them for the dead cobra. So the villagers then were like, So they started breeding and raising cobras, and were taking them in. And the city leaders is like, no, that's not what we meant. So they killed the program, and then they released all the cobras back into the wild. So they ended up with more cobras than they started with, which is that
Mm.
classic thing. If you're building a sales team and you give an incentive, you better be careful what you give the incentive for, because you're going to get more of that thing, because incentives do drive, behaviors. So that's the classic story around perverse incentives. So they probably got rid of the rats. Now they got to go for, or groundhog problem or whatever in Canada. So there's always an unintended consequence to these things. But
Just like 2 days ago, I was on an airboat in the Everglades, and they were talking about the python problem, and the
yeah,
tour guide was basically telling that exact same story. And I've heard it about the rats in Seattle, where you bring a rat tail, they give you some money, and then people start
yeah,
breeding rats.
yeah. It's exactly. I mean, perverse incentives. I mean, incentives work. So just always make sure you're incentivizing the right thing.
And for someone, David, who wants to develop their storytelling skills, is this something that you think can be developed? How do you recommend doing that? Um, Anything on
Yeah, I think
storytelling there?
reading a lot. Some of my favorite books, I'm sure you guys are familiar with him, are the Patrick Lencioni books, and his whole methodology is a parable to start that illustrates the situation and then the business principles at the back. So I think that's good. But then any really well written story, I think begin to pay attention around why did you connect with this? What was the hook? How did they grab you? And all that kind of stuff. And, I think if you go all the way back to, Greek literature, there's really only like 7 stories out there. There's the fish out of water story and all that kind of stuff. And so there's only a certain number of stories out there. So how can you cast what you're doing inside one of those kind of proven narratives, and then just build around that? But yeah, I think that reading a lot is good. And then actually there's videos you can watch on YouTube. And then I think Story Brand by Donald Miller is definitely worth a read, as well.
And I
We're
think a
going to
great
have to
example
start
of
creating
that,
a
a lot of
list.
us, well, I think a great
Yeah.
example of that, a lot of us have read the book Traction, right? Which is, I
Yeah.
describe it as kind of like the technical manual. But also on the shelf right behind me there is Get a Grip, which is the story of an IT company going through the process of implementing Traction. And I tell you, Get a Grip landed for me. And that's what I think about when we're in our own level 10 meetings, is the book Get a Grip, way more than I think about the book Traction. So that sort of illustrates
Yeah.
the power of the story.
Because you can see yourself in that story when you're reading it,
Yep, exactly.
And
which is
so
powerful.
Rex always says readers are leaders, right? And
True.
that really, and something that I think I'm going to talk to our producer and maybe see if we can do something about getting a reading list together, because I think even just on this show alone, we have already listed 5 book recommendations or something.
Yeah.
So, and I know we bring them up all the time. But kind of just transitions us into our next questions were around leadership. So can you tell us a little bit about what makes a great leader, and how your leadership style has evolved over time?
Yeah. So I think what Rex referenced earlier, that Dan Pink book Drive, has always been very meaningful to me around that autonomy, mastery, and purpose, where he basically says that people want autonomy in their job. They want mastery, is they want to know they're good at something. And so, how can the company allow them to see that they're really good at something? Then the purpose is it can't just be for profit, that there has to be some other, motive that ties that out. So I've usually tried to use that for management for me. But when I'm hiring people, I tend to look for like 2 things. One is, can they embrace change? Our world changes way too fast to be kind of stuck in the old ways. So can you embrace change? And then 2, can you learn new things quickly? Right. The third part of that really is I usually want to try to find out if they have the ability to overcome adversity. There was another great book called Grit by Angela Duckworth. And she goes through, and it's a long story, but the short version of it is that she tracks out, and the most clearly tied to success like feature is the ability to overcome adversity. So most people, that she profiled, they had a relative, their mom had cancer, their dad lost their job, they were homeless, or something like this, and they learned to overcome adversity. So the ability to overcome adversity. So usually I like to ask the question when I'm interviewing people, like, hey, tell me about a time you faced adversity and overcame it. Then I usually want to know about the learn new things quickly. I want to ask them, like, hey, Bessie, do you have a hobby? And then when you answer, I usually don't care what the answer is, to be perfectly honest. What I want to know is, like, then I'll ask, like, how did you learn to do that? And if you say, I took a formal class somewhere, I'm kind of like, eh. But if you say, oh, trial and error, and I watched a bunch of YouTube videos and I read some blogs, and I'm like, yes, that's the right answer, because we don't ever have time to formally train people enough in our world to keep pace with change. And then the other is like embracing change. And I think it's funny that particularly individuals embrace change very quickly. Institutions embrace change very slowly, right? So if you look at a law firm, all those lawyers, a very stiff corporate law firm, all those lawyers bought iPhones. They were doing all the things on their iPhones. But if you want to paint the color of the lobby one color to a different color, you got to convene the executive committee and like have a serious discussion, around it. So people tend to embrace change individually quickly, but institutionally very slowly. So what I always want to know is, like, can you embrace disruptive change? Can you not be unsettled by that, but kind of charge forward and then figure stuff out? So I think that when I'm leading, I want to give people autonomy, but I want to make sure that they're equipped to, utilize the autonomy in the right way, because autonomy can get you sometimes maybe off in the weeds. But if they're wired the right way from the hiring standpoint, then I have no question in giving them autonomy to go forward. So that's kind of the way I like to build teams. Is I don't really care about skills. I can teach you the skills. I care more about, who you are and kind of how you're wired and how you think about things. That's more important to me than, do you have all these certifications? I can teach you the certifications. I can't teach you to, connect to people and to be likable and to be engaging and those types of things.
What are some of the
I've asked this question a
things
lot. Do you think leaders are built, or are they natural?
C, all the above. I think that there are people that are born with some natural skills there that you can hone. But I also just think, like with salespeople, are salespeople born or made? Both. Some salespeople are born, but you can certainly make a salesperson. I think similarly that there's people who are just kind of born to be leaders, and then there are people who certainly can be made. I do think it's interesting. I read a book a long time ago called Leadership Without Easy Answers by a guy named Ronald Heifetz, who was the head of the leadership school at Kennedy School of Government, if I recall, at Harvard. And he said that lots of times we view leaders as people who like claw their way to the top. And lots of times leaders are people who just step into a vacuum. You end up in a meeting and no one's leading. And so someone's like, well, I guess I'll lead, or whatever. And so he said that, too often we kind of conflate wielding power with leadership. And that's not the truth. Is that leading is very different than kind of wielding, power either through title or status or things like that. So I do think it's interesting to watch people assume leadership that maybe aren't accustomed to it, but if you encourage them and then they do it, and like, oh, I can do this, and then you see more and more, of that.
I've been developing a concept I call the vacuum culture. I think it's the leader's responsibility to create those vacuums, like be very intentional about creating a vacuum so that people will step up, and then you got the right people, taking on whatever that action is that you created a vacuum around.
Yep.
I love some of your experiences with that, Rich.
Yeah.
You've shared a few of those things about how you've created, even in not work or professional, but in community environments where you've kind of had to create a vacuum.
Yeah, I'll tell a quick story. Is when I was a president of a Mustang car club down in California, and I watched every year we'd elect a new president, and at the end of that year they would kind of hand over the gavel to the next sucker, and you wouldn't see him anymore. And I realized it was because nobody was helping them, right? Like they would end up doing all the work. So, one year I got, nominated or asked to run for club president. And my first thought was, what, you guys want to get rid of me? Because that's sort of what happened every year. And I said, well, I'll do it, but I'm not doing all the work like the other people that left the club after being the president. And I got tested right away, which was the person doing the newsletter took a job in another state and was leaving. And I remember saying, hey, anybody want to do the newsletter? And it was just total crickets in the room. And I was faced right off the bat with that decision: do I do the newsletter as the president, or do I let it go undone? And I made a decision to let it go undone, right? AKA creating a vacuum. And I let the quality level fall a little bit, right? The next club event had very poor turnout, and everybody was saying I didn't notice I'm telling a story here, but I didn't I didn't know whether we were meeting on Saturday or Sunday, or where we were meeting, or what time we were meeting, so I just didn't go. And I remember somebody in the room saying, well, I didn't get a newsletter. And I'm like, you're right, you didn't get a newsletter. Who wants to do it? And finally somebody said, I'll do it. And I'm like, great. And I spent some time teaching them how we do it. And then from that point forward, they did the newsletter. And it wasn't very long after that, we needed somebody to be a car show chairman. And I said, who, anybody, willing to do that job? Remember, this is a volunteer organization, right? Like, I had to get people to do real work, and we weren't paying them anything. They were volunteering their time. And car show chairman has a fair amount of work. And I remember doing the same thing, creating that vacuum. Like, I'm not going to do it because I have enough other duties, and I want this to stay fun for me. And I remember somebody in the back of the room saying, I guess I can do it. And it would have been very easy for me as the leader to say, thank you, but I didn't. I said, no, you already volunteered to do the newsletter. We need somebody else to carry the load as car show chairman, right? And that was me creating a vacuum. And, finally somebody else said, I guess I can do it, right? And I remember the club was stuck at like 20 people for years. But as soon as I took over as president and making sure that everybody was sharing the load, many hands make light work, and just applying that vacuum concept, the club just grew and grew and grew over the next 5 years, as where I was served as president. And I kind of applied a lot of that in my own leadership skills in the office, was treating people like they were volunteers, creating vacuums, making sure nobody was overworked. And it really just sort of became a pretty good place to work.
I love that, Rex.
Agreed.
I want to make sure we have time for our very last segment, which is going to be kind of fun. It's going to be rapid fire questions to David, and we're going to ask you some security FAQs. These questions that we came up with, Chris and I came up with them. We talk to partners all the time about their security questions that they have, and see, these are some of the ones that we see over and over again. So let's take a look at the first question we have. So the first one is just, I don't know what I don't know. Where should I start? Where should someone start with cybersecurity?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people use housing analogies with cybersecurity. So it's like, where do I start to secure my home? Well, you want deadbolt locks, you want a Ring camera, you want certain things. What cybersecurity insurance seems to be driving right now, or they're looking for basically like 5 things. What they want to see is that you have an EDR, endpoint detection and response. They want to see that you have MFA, multi-factor authentication. They want to see you have segmented backups, so you have backups in multiple places as opposed to one single place, because the bad guys can encrypt your backups. They want to see you have security awareness training, and then they want to see you have antivirus. I would assume 99% of the clients out there have antivirus, but the rest of those, I don't know. Some people have like security awareness training and that kind of stuff. Nobody likes to turn on MFA, but I would say that those 5 are kind of the table stakes for clients, that if you don't know where to start, see which of those 5 you can check the box on, and whichever ones you haven't checked the box on, go get that. And MFA is by far the easiest. Microsoft says only 30% of end users have MFA turned on. That's like leaving your car unlocked with the keys in it, right? Just don't do that. So turn on MFA. It's a pain in the butt. I get it, but it is the number one thing you can do to prevent cyber breaches.
Awesome. Our next question is something that I hear a lot is, how do I get my clients or small, medium-sized businesses to care about cybersecurity? Like, they don't want to do it. What can we say to that?
Yeah, so I think that the main thing there is you have to teach them that they are at risk. So explain to them how a breach happens. I think most small businesses have this false sense of security. No one wants my stuff. Kind of like I mentioned earlier with the farm analogy. It's like, oh,
Mhm.
that's far away. That's the big stuff. They don't want
Yeah.
my things. That's not true. I think there's been a disservice to where people don't really talk about it that much. So, I've been breached, you've been breached, Chris has been breached, and then Rex thinks he's safe because we haven't talked about the fact we've been breached, right? So there becomes this false insecurity. So I think really you have to have this conversation around risk and say, like, hey, breaches are happening. They're happening to people like you. Are you prepared to do nothing? Or are you prepared to, be held to account for the fact that you did nothing and now you have a breach, which comes with reputational risk and all that kind of stuff. So move away from technology. It's not a technology conversation, it is a risk conversation, and help them orient around that.
Awesome. Our next question is about, oh, sorry. What were you going to say, Chris?
As you say, but
Just,
you talked about it not being always technology, but there's technology involved. So I was leading into the next question just to kind of say, okay, well, when it comes to
Yes.
that,
Yeah.
how do you choose technology and particularly security vendors?
Yeah, so it's a stack, right? Is that there is no one thing you can go buy that does all the things. So the question really is, how many layers of security do you need? And the answer to that is, well, what's the value of the asset you're protecting? I typically tell this story around this where I was looking at a car to buy from a guy one time, and we go to this guy's house, and he has 6-car garage. There's a Ferrari in the far right, and I was looking not at the Ferrari, I was looking at this other car. And my buddy says, "Hey, Joe, can we take the Ferrari out?" And he says, "Yeah, the keys are in it." I'm like, "Whoa, keys are in it?" And he said, "Well, yeah, if it's the garage door's down, it's secure." And a lot of people think that the perimeter is secure, everything behind it is secure. When what you really need is layers of security: garage door down, Ferrari locked, key to the house locked, key in a lockbox, all that kind of stuff. So then the question is, well, how many layers do I need? Well, it depends on the value of the asset I'm protecting. So if you got a 93 Camry, doesn't matter. If you've got a Ferrari, you need lots of layers of security. Maybe it's a Honda Accord, you need fewer. So I really think that when you're looking at security vendors, it's like, okay, what goes in the stack and how many of those things layer up? Do I need just the deadbolt locks and the Ring camera, or do I need those lasers from the Tom Cruise movie, to protect the safe? And so that's really kind of, you think about it, is how many layers, and then what's the best vendor for that layer.
I had a police officer was a client of mine. They were one of my managed clients, and he had an interesting take. He said a crime occurs at the intersection of desire and opportunity. Right. So if you're walking and you don't want to be walking, and you see a bike just laying on the ground without a lock on it, right? There's a lot of opportunity. You can have low desire and still take the bike, right? But
Yeah.
if that bike's got a big lock on it, and nothing's going to happen unless you have really, really high desire to take that bike.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and
so
we always
it's
talk
sort
about
of where those
security,
lines
convenience,
cross.
exchange rate. Yeah. It's the security, convenience, exchange rate. Is it convenient or secure? Right? Why do you want password as your password? Because it's convenient, but that's not secure. Right? So how do you get people to make that trade-off where they give up convenience for more security? Is it easier just to walk outside, Rex, to your point, and get your bike and go ride and not have to unlock it and all that kind of stuff? Well, sure. But is your bike going to be there when you go out? Probably not, because somebody's going to have stolen it because it wasn't locked to anything. So it's that classic, you're 100% right, is that the bad guys are looking for the easy way. And so is it how do you make it more challenging for them? How do you make that opportunity lower for them? Well, make it more secure, which is going to make it less convenient for you, but that's the better option. Same reason you don't leave the keys in your car when you go into Target, right? You take them with you and lock the door, and then you do a little double check, bleep bleep, as you walk away.
And that leads us a little bit to our next question, which is, where does insurance play a factor in our security posture?
Yeah, briefly, cybersecurity is almost becoming a de facto standard, where people right now, cybersecurity insurance providers have a lot of unknown exposure. There's no actuarial tables for them to go off of. So they wrote a lot of policies, and they had a lot of exposure that they're not aware of. So now they're coming in and building these big, long checklists of like, hey, Bessie, are you doing all these things? And if so, then here's your cybersecurity insurance premium. If you're not, your premium's going, way up. So they are almost becoming a standard. It's not a standard in the traditional sense like NIST 800-171 or something like that, but it is becoming this standard where people are going to have to adhere to the things that cybersecurity insurance expects if they want to be insured. And there's a lot of risk in not being insured.
Definitely. Let's see. Our next question is just, we talked about this already. World of cybersecurity is always changing. So how can MSPs stay on top of it? How can they anticipate what's coming up?
Well, there's a handy dandy show on Pax8 Live every week that goes over a lot of the cybersecurity stuff with Matt and Dom, which is great. We're putting a ton of content out in Academy on that around CIS controls, which is a great thing as well. But then I think beyond that, it's more about I think we have to destigmatize cybersecurity so that people can really understand what the threat actually is. Like, Bessie, if you and I were neighbors and your house is broken into, I'm not going to be like, haha, Bessie's house got broken into. But be like, ooh, Bessie, we need to be more vigilant in the neighborhood, or whatever. Similarly, though, and when businesses experience breaches, we need to destigmatize that so that they're willing to talk about it, so everyone's awareness can come on up. So I think what you would see from that would be more, local articles, local news stories about local people who had breaches so that everyone can be aware, as opposed to, it's very hush hush and the only thing you hear about are the high profile ones. So by and large, though, I think for Pax8 partners, Pax8 is a great place to keep you apprised of what's going on right now out there.
Awesome. Chris, do you want to bring us into final thoughts?
Yeah, it's been great having you on the show, but David, I want to give you opportunity. Is there anything we didn't ask, anything we didn't touch on that you'd like to, any parting thoughts for us or
No,
listeners?
I think the only thing that I would say is that just for people to recognize that cybersecurity is a journey, it's not a destination, right? There is no status. If Rex said, David, I have $1 trillion, create me an environment that can't be hacked, I can't do it, right? There is no way, there is no certainty. So, I used to weigh a lot more than I weigh now. I've dropped a lot of LBs. And so how many years did I add to my life? Don't know. But did I improve my health outcomes? 100%. I did. Similarly, if you buy cybersecurity tools and improve your approach, did you make yourself not hackable? Nah. But have you improved your outcomes? 100% that you have. So I just want people to understand that, they just need to begin the maturation process. If you're waiting, don't wait. Just go on and start doing things now, because it will improve your outcomes. Can't guarantee any results, but it definitely can improve, your outcomes. So I just want people to understand, like, man, it seems daunting. It seems like there's a lot of stuff you got to do, and that's true. But the answer is just get started and start moving along that maturation.
That goes along with one of my Rexisms. It doesn't matter where you are when you start, it's that you start where you are.
Yeah, that's right. Like, whether you're doing Orange Theory or CrossFit or running, just pick something and be dedicated to it, and it'll give you results. And I think that's what we need most end users to do with MSP's help, is get started, improve their cybersecurity, maturity, and it will yield dividends. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, David, for coming on the show.
Yeah.
You're an amazing guest. It was great to have you.
Thank
We
you.
learned so much, and we had so many stories to tell now too. So really appreciate you speaking with us and having us on the show. So I want to just thank everyone for watching. We'll be off next week because of July 4th. So don't come tune in next week, but tune in the week after, Tuesday at 2 p.m. Mountain, on demand and on demand always. Like and subscribe, please, if you can. That really helps us out. And I'll pass it over to Rex for final thoughts.
Just to point out, I heard while we were at Beyond that we went over 1,000 subscribers, right? So that's a good thing.
Woohoo!
So definitely excited about that. And as always, think about what you heard today and ask yourself, what are you going to do differently tomorrow? Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.